I think coding is going away first, or coding is being, done by the AI models first. And then the broader task of software engineering will take longer. But I think that is, that doing that end to end, I think that is going to happen as well.
The CEO of Anthropic, the man building one of the most powerful AI systems on the planet, just said coding is going away. Not in 10 years, first. And that's just a start. In the last few months, Dario has given 3 of the most honest interviews of his career. At the World Economic Forum with researcher Dwarkesh Patel, and in a direct Q&A about careers and coding. I've pulled the moments that matter most for anyone building right now. This channel is about the exciting progress of AI and the huge benefits it's bringing, but also the real challenges we have to face honestly and solve together. Dario is one of the few people building this technology who talks about both sides. That's why we're here. Subscribe if you're new. Let's go.
I don't think that's going to turn out to be that far off. So, the mechanism whereby I imagined it would happen is that we would make models that were good at coding and good at AI research, and we would use that to produce the next generation of model and speed it up, to create a loop that would increase the speed of model development. We are now, in terms of the models that write code, I have engineers within Anthropic who say, I don't write any code anymore. I just let the model write the code. I edit it. I do the things around it. I don't know, we might be 6 to 12 months away from when the model is doing most, maybe all of what SWEs do end to end.
On the basic hypothesis of, as you put it, within 10 years, we'll get to, what I call kind of country of geniuses in a data center. I'm at like 90% on that. And it's hard to go much higher than 90% because the world is so unpredictable. Yeah. My guess for that is, there's a lot of problems that are basically like, we can do this when we have the country of geniuses in a data center. And so, my picture for that is, again, if you made me guess, it's like 1 to 2 years, maybe 1 to 3 years. It's really hard to tell. I have a strong view, 95% that like, all this will happen in 10 years. I think that's just a super safe bet. Yeah. And then I have a hunch this is more like a 50-50 thing. I would think about tasks that are human-centered, tasks that involve relating to people. I think that the stuff like code and software engineering is becoming more and more kind of AI focused, things like math and science.
Is that coding or engineering? If I were to segregate coding and engineering to be 2 completely different things.
Yeah.
Is coding going away, or is engineering element of software where you're an architect trying to figure out?
I think coding is going away first, or coding is being, done by the AI models first. And then the broader task of software engineering will take longer. But I think that is, that doing that end to end, I think that is going to happen as well, I would say. But, again, the elements of like, design or making something that's useful to users or knowing what the demand is or, managing teams of like AI models, like, those things may still be present. Again, like there's this comparative advantage is surprisingly powerful, right? Even if you're only doing like, 5% of the task, like, that 5% gets super amplified and levered because it's like you're only doing 5% of the task. The AI does the other 95%. And so you become, 20 times more productive. Again,
I have about the same view. I actually agree with you and with Demis that at the time I made the comment, there was no impact on the labor market. I wasn't saying there was an impact on the labor market at that moment. Now I think maybe we're starting to see just the little beginnings of it, in software and coding. I even see it within Anthropic where, I can look forward. I can kind of look forward to a time where on the more junior end and then on the more intermediate end, we actually need less and not more people. And, we're thinking about how to deal with that within Anthropic in a sensible way. 1 to 5 years as of 6 months ago, I would stick with that. If you kind of, connect this to what I said before, which is, we might have AI that's better than humans at everything in, maybe 1 to 2 years, maybe a little longer than that. Those don't seem to line up. The reason is that there's this lag and there's this replacement thing, right? I know that the labor market is adaptable, right? It's just like, 80% of people used to do farming. Farming got automated, and then they became factory workers and then knowledge workers. So, there is some level of adaptability here as well, right? We should be economically sophisticated about how the labor market works. But my worry is as this exponential keeps compounding, and I don't think it's going to take that long, again, somewhere between a year and 5 years, it will overwhelm our ability to adapt.
I want to sit with that for a second because Dario just said something that most people don't notice in the noise of the jobs debate. He's not saying AI will eventually replace people. He's saying he can already see it starting inside Anthropic itself, at the junior and intermediate level. The CEO of the company building the technology is watching his own hiring needs change in real time. That's not a prediction, that's a data point. If you're finding this useful, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this reach more people who need to hear it. Back to Dario.
Again, anything where you're building on AI, like if AI is the tailwind, if you can be part of some other part of the supply chain, something in the semiconductor space, which, I think is, that's one example. There has an element of kind of, physical world and more traditional engineering, not software engineering. Again, the very kind of human-centered professions, like, that is something I would think in terms of. And I think the other thing I always say is, like, in the world in which, AI can kind of generate anything and create anything, having basic critical thinking skills may be the most important thing to success. I worry about, these AI models that generate images and videos, and we don't make, models that generate images and videos and for many reasons, but, this is one of them. It's really hard to tell what's real from what's not. And so, a significant part of success may be having the street smarts, not to get fooled by, hopefully we can crack down on and regulate some of this fake content, but assume we can't. Critical thinking skills are going to be really important, and you don't want to fall for things that are fake. You don't want to have false beliefs. You don't want to get scammed. I think if we deploy, again, it's the machines of loving grace and adolescence of technology. I think if we deploy AI in the wrong way, if we deploy it carelessly, then yes, people could become stupider. Even if an AI is always going to be better than you at something, you can still learn that thing, right? You can still enrich yourself intellectually. And so that's a choice we have to make as individual companies, as individual people, and as a society overall. We have engineers at Anthropic who don't write any code. And when I look at the productivity, to your previous question, we have folks who say, this GPU kernel, this chip, I used to write it myself, I just have Claude do it. And so there's this enormous improvement in productivity. There is zero time for bullshit. There is zero time for feeling like we're productive when we're not. These tools make us a lot more productive. In time, I think the effect is going to be very fast. So I don't know, you could have these two poles, right? One is AI is it's not going to make progress. It's slow. It's going to take, kind of forever to diffuse within the economy, right? Economic diffusion has become one of these buzzwords that's a reason why we're not going to make AI progress or why AI progress doesn't matter. And the other axis is we'll get recursive self-improvement, the whole thing, can't you just draw an exponential line on the curve? We're going to. My take has not changed. It has always been my view that, AI is going to be incredibly powerful. I think Demis and I, kind of agree on that. It's just a question of exactly when. And because it's incredibly powerful, it will do all these wonderful things, like the ones I talked about in Machines of Loving Grace. It, will help us cure cancer. It may help us to eradicate tropical diseases. It will help us understand the universe.
but that there are these, immense and grave risks that, not that we can't address them. I'm not a doomer, but that, we need to think about them and we need to address them. We are knocking on the door of these incredible capabilities, right? The ability to build basically machines out of sand, right? I think it was inevitable that the instant we started working with fire, but how we handle it is not inevitable. And so I think the next few years, we're going to be dealing with, how do we keep these systems under control that are highly autonomous and smarter than any human? How do we make sure that individuals don't misuse them, right? I have worries about things like bioterrorism. How do we make sure that nation states don't misuse them? That's why I've been so concerned about, the CCP, other authoritarian governments. What are the economic impacts, right? I've talked about labor displacement a lot. And what haven't we thought of, which in many cases, may be the hardest thing to deal with at all.
I think my worry is if we had 100 years for this to happen all very slowly, we'd get used to it. Like we've gotten used to the presence of explosives in society, or like the presence of various like new weapons, or the presence of video cameras. We would get used to it over 100 years, and we'd develop governance mechanisms. We'd make our mistakes. My worry is just that this is happening all so fast, and so I think maybe we need to do our thinking faster about how to make these governance mechanisms work.
Yeah.
1 to 2 years. The man building the technology, who has been right about the trajectory of AI for the last decade, just said that out loud at Davos. Not to scare you, to prepare you. That's exactly why this channel exists. We're here every week breaking down the progress, the opportunities, and the real challenges, so you're never the last person in the room to understand what's happening. If this hit differently than the usual AI content, subscribe. It's free, and it means you won't miss what's coming next. And drop a comment right now. Is your job or your business on Dario's list? And what's the one thing you're doing about it? See you on the next one.